There is an old Jewish legend that goes like this. Time before time, when the world was young, two brothers shared a field. They lived on either side of the field and they worked it together. And at the end of each day of harvest, they divided the grain equally between them. One of the brothers was a bachelor and the other had a wife and children. It occurred one day to the single brother, "It isn't really fair that we divide the grain equally because I have only myself and my brother has other mouths to feed." And so he began each night to fill a sack with his own grain and cross the field and empty it into his brother's granary. At about the same time, the other brother thought, "It really isn't fair that we divide the grain equally because I have children to care for me in my old age, and my brother has no one who can look after him." So he too, every night, would fill a sack with his own grain and carry it across the field and empty it into his brother's granary. Each morning, both brothers would find their own supply of grain miraculously restored. And, as you might imagine, one night, at the center of the field, under the moonlight, the two brothers met each other, each with a sack of grain on his shoulder. Instantly they realized what had been happening, and they fell into each other's arms. The legend goes on to say that God said to the angels, "This is holy ground, and on this site I will build my temple." And so it is said that the Temple of Solomon was built at this very place. For the house of God is always founded on such places as when human beings can still be astonished by each other's love. Beautiful story. Two people discerning needs in each other, choosing to give from their own provision into the holding of the other, each finding the experience somehow miraculous, then discovering the truth, that the source of the miracle was mutual love, then the falling into each other's arms, then the voice saying, "This is holy ground. On such love, we can build a house of transformation." It's a pretty fair fit to our text for today, which is from the Apostle Peter, who, in paraphrase, says this: "There are great gifts of grace on your life. Now be good stewards of that grace by serving each other with the gifts that you have been given. And when you do it, regard it as your sharing being God's sharing." Now that is a staggering claim that mutual serving is God's serving. But let's go back to that beautiful story. I'd like to put a question to it. Suppose that one of those brothers has anger issues and is pretty judgy and sometimes can be not very nice. And imagine that the other brother is a bit narcissistic, is sometimes full of himself, and can be condescending, and is sometimes insufferable. His politics are awful. And these brothers, both badly flawed, proceed to do what the story says they did. Discerned need in each other, gave from their own provision, found it miraculous, embraced one another. Does God still call the giving and the meeting of those two sometimes irritating men holy ground? I'll build my temple here? Why, of course. Or so our text from 1 Peter seems to say in that famous line, love covers a multitude of sins. Love is the measure of what matters in us. There can be a whole lot wrong with me and a whole lot wrong with you that simply does not weigh as much as the decisive weight of love expressed or love withheld. Not that we shouldn't come to real terms with our faults. We should face and keep working on what would make us have more and more wholeness and wellness. But the main focus by far for each of us should be not on what is off about us, but on the practice of expressing more love and growing it and giving it. Here is the shape of maturity: to look less to the flaws you've got and more to the gifts you've got, and sharing them. And we can flip that truth onto its other side, because how easy it is to see somebody else's fault and to judge it and to be done. But once a decision is made that faults notwithstanding, we will love the other and choose in love to serve, to pray, to share with the other, it begins to be that the faults of the other weigh less and less. Love covers a multitude not only of our sins, but of theirs. But I've got another question for that opening beautiful story. Wouldn't it be a better story if instead of their concern for each other and sharing with each other, each of these two brothers thought of somebody else, not in their family, who had equal need or greater need, and secretly carried sacks of their grain to the granary of a stranger or the granary of a neighbor whose need was equal or greater? Wouldn't it make a better story if they went outside the family? I think it might make a better story. So, why? Designate and celebrate as holy ground where such love, such generous love occurs between siblings, people within the same family. And for that matter, why is today's text focused on in-house mutual love and serving and sharing with and for each other? As in, with whatever gift each of you has received, serve one another. I mean, isn't that part of what's wrong with much religion? The members turned in toward themselves, caring for their own people and neglecting those beyond their walls. And yes, that has been among the church's great sins. And it happens to be a misconstrual of what the scriptures mean when they insist that you and I love each other. Because our calling in the first place is to be an alternative community, to fleshing out in the first place for each other and with each other what a commonwealth of Christ might look like. Each person cared for, each person caring, each person's gift being valued and honored and welcomed, each person's gift being used for the rest, each person granting by their gift a strengthening, encouraging, and honoring, a serving of the others. An outpost of the commonwealth of God, none of us withholding, but all of us good stewards of the manifold grace of God with and for each other. And as it happens, that is precisely what shapes us more and more into outreaching community beyond our own community. Because in the community, that's what we have learned to do. We've seen how it's done. We are strengthened for it, nurtured for it, sustained for it, and passionate about it. It turns out that we have needed each other's kindness and courage to find more of our own kindness and courage. And when I experience the beauty of your spirit of generosity, I want to be someone of a more beautifully generous spirit. We've been talking lately about trust, which in the end is what sharing with each other is all about. In the expressing of shared love, we learn we can entrust to each other the gifts that we've been given. We learn to trust God to continue caring for our need as we give all that we can for the good of each other and beyond. And we learn we can even trust ourselves, having been gifted to be good stewards of that manifold grace. Joe Biden, as he closed his acceptance speech, spoke of how when he was a little kid in Scranton, one day he walked out the door and heard his grandpa say, "Keep the faith, Joey." And his grandma corrected, "No, Joey, spread it." When we in the church do what we can to pass it on between and among and from each other's lives, we are practicing a kind of revolution over against the culture in which we live, which is so thick with self-serving, with getting and keeping and guarding and hating and fighting, centered on the self and on the self's own tribe. But those who are stewards of grace, they live in glad resistance to that and in liberated witness to a better way. Lately online, I have seen more than once posted by a friend or two some words by Pope Francis. Rivers do not drink from their own waters. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their own fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. Life is good when you're happy, but life is much better when others are happier because of you. That is the happy life of those who mean to be good stewards of God's manifold grace, sharing our gifts with each other, and beyond, we become the good news of real church to each other, and with each other, the good news of real church to the world.